Morning, Torah lovers. Welcome to my learning of the first two prakim of Mishna D'mai in honor of the memory of the soul of Lea Andersen, Zichronah Livracha. A group of us are learning, trying to do a full learning of all of the Mishnah before the end of her Shloshim, and I'm learning these two prakim as part of that. And yes, I'm doing one Mishnah every day. So yesterday we finished the first parak of Mishna D'mai, and today we're going to start the second parak. All right. Ve'elu dvarim mitasrin d'mai b'chol makom. Hadvela v'hatmarim v'hacharuvim ha'orez v'hakamon. Ha'orez shebachutz ala haaretz kol hamishtamesh mimenu patur. So yesterday it seemed like the first chapter of this Masechet is about ways that we treat D'mai produce, which is produce that we get from Amei Haaretz, who are people who we don't necessarily trust to tithe the produce properly. If it's not tithed properly, then it can't be eaten according to the way the rabbis observe. So D'mai produce is doubtful whether it's been tithed properly or not. And the first chapter of Masechet D'mai seems to be dealing with ways in which D'mai produce, we do treat it as if it has been tithed, largely. Now we're going to get into the second chapter. So these are Ve'elu dvarim mitasrin d'mai b'chol makom. And these things, one tithes them under the stricture of D'mai in every place. Meaning, if you get the following kinds of produce, you should definitely take tithes from them yourself so that you know that it has been done and that you can eat it. Anywhere you get these things, you should do this. Hatvela v'hatzmarim, dates and figs, v'hacharuvim and carobs, v'ha'orez and rice, v'hakamon and cumin. These 5 things seems to be from Gahati's explanation. These 5 things, for sure, Devela and Tmarim and Charuvim, for sure, dates and figs and carobs are well-known products of the land of Israel, and tithing only needs to be done on agricultural produce from the land of Israel. So if you're getting dates or figs or carobs, in the world that the Mishnah is writing in, without international shipping or next day refrigerated delivery of produce, if you're eating dates or figs or carobs, it seems like the Mishnah is saying you can be relatively confident that these products are coming from the land of Israel. Also rice, and Kahati explains rice from Eretz Yisrael looks like unique to Eretz Yisrael, and other varieties of rice from other places will look different. Hi, welcome. So if you have the kind of rice that looks like it's from Eretz Yisrael, like Israel rice, then you have to follow the stringency of D'mai and take tithes from it yourself, from doubt, if you get this rice from an Am Haaretz. And cumin, which was the kind of cumin that they would grow in Eretz Yisrael, again, according to Kati, is a unique variety to Eretz Yisrael, easily distinguishable. If you have Eretz Yisrael cumin, then you know it's from Eretz Yisrael, therefore obligated in Ma'asrot. And if you're getting that Eretz Yisrael cumin or Eretz Yisrael rice or any of these other things from an Am Haaretz, then you know that it is definitely, this produce is definitely obligated in Maasrot, and therefore you should apply the stringency of D'mai, where because of a doubt of whether the Am Haaretz who grew the produce and sold it to you was taking all the Maasrot, you should take it. You now need to take it yourself, just to be safe. Ve'ha'orez shebachutza la'aretz. You know what? I can be highlighting stuff. Ve'ha'orez shebachutza la'aretz kol ha'mishtamesh mimenu patur. And rice that is from outside the land of Israel, anyone who uses it is exempt from taking D'mai from it because it's not from Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so you're exempt from D'mai if you get rice from outside the land of Israel. Why is this special? Why can't you say, well, if you get carobs or cumin or dates from outside the land of Eretz Yisrael, that's also exempt from D'mai, or exempt from being used. Anyone who uses it is exempt. Kati explains because this rice is recognizably not from Eretz Yisrael, but dates and figs and carobs and cumin that come from outside the land of Israel are obligated in D'mai in the land of Israel because they have varieties in Eretz Yisrael that are similar to those outside of the land of Israel, and it could be that they got switched. So if you are inside the land of Israel and you have purchased rice from outside the land of Israel, then you don't have to take D'mai from it because you can be absolutely sure that this rice is definitely not grown in the land of Israel. But for the other four things, all of those have varieties that could be confused with Eretz Yisrael varieties. Therefore, if you are eating those foods in Eretz Yisrael, you can have a very strong assumption, apparently, that they could have been swapped out. You can't really tell the difference, and so you should be strict and tithe it. That seems to be what's going on with why rice is different. It's like some feature unique to the specific agricultural varieties that were existent at the time. And this is actually a really interesting topic to me as a former farmer because this is like not with the globalization of agriculture and the globalization of seed production and distribution, and also the concentration of not just GMO varieties, but all kinds of varieties of agricultural produce, which have been bred specially to be functional productive members of our economized agrarian societies. I'm including everything in that descriptor. It's harder to find truly local varieties of produce, whereas before maybe 100 years ago, it used to be extremely common, and basically like the only way you would get produce to grow in a place was if it was a local variety that was special, that was adapted specifically to that region, like how plants normally grow. So the concept that you would have an Eretz Yisrael variety of rice that looks different from like a Babylonian variety of rice would be not only like intelligible, but obvious, so obvious to people that you wouldn't even need to say it. It's only now that we have like, we grow the same variety of wheat or literally a clone of the same banana tree all over the world and they all look the same, that we need to explain that that varieties of agricultural produce are used to be hyper localized to a specific region, and that they would have like distinguishable enough differences between them, that you could just look at it and be able to tell where that stuff was grown, not just where the variety originated from, but where it was actually grown, because those plants wouldn't grow other places. They were adapted to the environment. We didn't have synthetic or synthesized nitrogen and other kinds of fertilizers that would allow plants from other regions to grow successfully in places they weren't adapted to natively. Okay, I could talk about this forever, but it's just really cool to note that like how baked into the lives of the rabbis and Chazal, and you don't even have to go back that far, the inherent variety and diversity of even agricultural plant life was, and how central that was to their understanding of the way the world worked and the way economies functioned. And that's also because we are in Seder Zeraim, the whole book, one of the 6 books of the Mishnah, that is called Scenes, which is all about agricultural produce and agrarian economy and the way that our farming and agriculture would function in the land of Israel and so on, according to the Torah. It's all about stuff like this, and that's why it's kind of hard to understand, and people don't study this stuff so much. I think not only because it's not applicable anymore, because people love korbanot, people love learning the sacrifices. That's also not applicable anymore. But because the stuff that's being talked about in this is so specific and so different from the way our agricultural economies function, that it just is hard to get into at all, but I think it's very rewarding. Especially if you're interested in like local agriculture, like CSAs or like small farming. And there are a lot of really cool movements that exist in the world trying to bring back this kind of localized, specific, weird little varieties. And like, there's a whole world out there. Okay, but that's, I'll get off my soapbox. That is this Mishnah. If I were to guess, this whole parak of Mishnah, maybe we're now moving into ways that we treat D'mai produce as if it has not been tithed. If the first parak was about ways we treat D'mai produce as if it has been tithed, now we can be lenient or even exempt it from our own extra tithing, or tithing misafek. Then this parak maybe will be about ways that we treat D'mai produce as if it has not been tithed. And we're still doing a like tithing from safek, but the safek, we're leaning towards the side of the safek is true as opposed to the safek is not true. So I'll be looking forward to seeing how that plays out in the rest of this Mishnah, which will be 4 more Mishnahs, which will take us to the end of the parak, and also to the end of Leah's Shloshim. Speaking of which, this learning is in memory and for the uplift of the soul of Lea Yocheved bat Abraham V'Sara. And in general, the learning at Tea for Torah is sponsored in memory of these beloved neshamas. And I will see you all here tomorrow for the second Mishnah of the second parak of Mishna D'mai.